By storytelling, I mean telling a story, of course, an imaginary tale, a piece of fiction. But I would also like to, include telling non-fiction like a story. We all know some who can narrate a simple incident in an interesting way. I'd also like to expand the term story to include all of literature and all of the arts as well. A poem, a painting, a photo can also tell a story. We have, as a species, always told stories. We have had different ways in which we told them. To start at the beginning, we have cave paintings. We've discovered a lot of artwork on our cave walls, um, drawings of horses, elephants, deer, human beings, some hunting scenes, some symbols that we have not yet been able to interpret. Cave paintings discovered the world over tell us that humans have always tried to express themselves. We've always tried to tell a story with crude tools and whatever images that we could create with those tools. Some colored symbols found in Africa are over 40,000 years old. So our canvas has changed. We began with stone, then moved to leaves, bark, paper, to liquid crystal display today, and perhaps something unimaginable tomorrow. Art has evolved from crude line drawings to exquisite paintings, miniatures, carvings, from primitive hieroglyphs to flowing poetry and prose. Storytelling is associated more with children. We tell them these to, bond with them, entertain them, to get them to eat, to go to sleep. We've known for long that stories teach. They teach morals, ethics, life values, religious teachings. We use stories for that. Even management lessons. Movies like Lagan have been used to teach teamwork and leadership skills in business schools. Traditionally, we have had our, Panchatantra stories, Jataka tales, Aesop's fables, folklore, fairy tales of all regions. Some of these stories typically end with the line, and the moral of the story is. And as children grow older and start disliking this kind of advice, we package the moral or the teaching more subtly in the story so that the way of teaching is more suitable to that age. Not just at home, we use stories even to teach in our schools. Isn't that what word problems and mathematics are while teaching arithmetic? We do teach addition as 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, but we begin by asking the primary school child, you have 3 chocolates and your mother gives you 2 more, so now how many chocolates do you have in all? So using chocolates and mangoes and whatever objects that we think may be of interest to the child, we teach. And through analogies and relatable scenarios, we ask them a few years later, if 10 men can build a bridge in 7 days, how much time will 11 men working at 1.5 times the speed take to build 3 bridges and so on. But after a point, we say, okay, that's enough. Now let's get down to work. Telling a high school student, oh, imagine you're a ray of light and you start from Earth on January 1st, 2024. When will you reach the next galaxy? Sounds rather ridiculous. We move to abstractions like X, Y, Z. We cut down on the storytelling, as if to tell them that, okay, you've had fun, now get down to work. But actually, stories are serious work. We need them. And but then why do we need stories? Now I'm going to make something of a detour and point to a problem that we have today. The problem of fragmentation of knowledge. We divide knowledge into small, manageable portions and deliver them to our students who learn and understand each portion, each part separately. We call these different subjects, different lessons. We divide knowledge into smaller and smaller parts and focus exclusively on one part, ignoring the rest. And we can see the result of this fragmentation today. All the major challenges that we face today are a result of this fragmentation of knowledge. Environmental degradation, climate change, poverty, unemployment, political, social instability are all consequences of this fragmentation. These are all complex challenges that defy solution by narrow, piecemeal forms of knowing. But we continue to look at each problem separately. For 2 centuries, economic theory developed without considering the impact of human behavior on the environment. And now we are waking up to the problem of environmental degradation and climate change and wondering how to fix it. Even today, there are many who believe that no, we humans have absolutely no role in this. What we do in our industries is one thing, the floods and the droughts and the heat waves are another. Automation and labor saving technologies are developed and adopted to improve productivity, competitiveness, without regard for their impact on employment, equity, social stability, human welfare. Financial markets have been divorced from the economic welfare of the people whom they were originally intended to support. Medical students do not receive adequate training in managing patients' emotions and their family members' psychological needs, all of which contribute to the treatment. Engineering students do not learn enough about ecology and the result of the consequences of their work, their products, their structures on the environment. An intellectual divide separates many of our academic disciplines and streams. So, how did we get here? Why have we separated life knowledge into small, unconnected packets? Actually, education is an amazing organization that we have developed. We've taken all the knowledge that humans have learned in the past millennia, organized them into a comprehensive framework. We've encapsulated it, and we offer it to our students as a 15, 20-year-old 20-year study. The organization of this knowledge. Otherwise, how will we teach them? We have to have a structure. And this organization of knowledge is made possible by first dividing the whole into small portions. Otherwise, how do you offer this vast body of knowledge? So we have grouped them into different streams, subjects, lessons, topics. But as we keep dividing into smaller and smaller portions and specialize, what we do is we begin to look from very close at a small part separated from the rest of the story. So we lose sight of the whole picture when you take a painting and you focus, you zoom in on a small part alone, ignoring the rest. It doesn't make any sense. It does not even look beautiful. We end up staring at the individual brush strokes or the dots if it's an online image that have neither meaning nor beauty when seen in isolation. So this kind of breaking up of a body of knowledge results in isolation of different streams in education, isolation of people working in those different streams and how they think and try to solve any problem. As we try to teach the knowledge collected over centuries in a 3, 4, 5-year-old course, we condense it by abstracting knowledge of many life experiences into a series of generalized abstract principles. So such abstraction reduces life knowledge to objective equations, to theorems. This may be intelligible to the intellect, but they don't readily appeal to the imagination, to the creativity, to emotional intelligence. We need this organizing, no doubt about it. We need to organize and condense and abstract. Otherwise, how can you teach what we have learned over 200,000 years of our existence in 20 years to the next generation? So we take the essence of our learning, but this is condensed to such a level of abstraction that all the life has been taken out of the life experience. And what we finally offer to our students appears dry. They are unable to relate to it. When we say, like, for example, Columbus discovered America in 1492. What about all the years that he spent trying to convince people that his idea was sound, his struggle to get funding, how he managed to convince sailors to sail his ships when they were afraid that they would, fall off the edge of the earth because they believed the world was flat, the social, psychological implications of his trip and the discovery on world history. The human subjective element is left out. And it is not even possible for a geography teacher to do more. If you take our Indian freedom struggle, it is made of tens of thousands of powerful, emotional, touching human narratives. But when all that a history teacher gets is one lesson to teach this subject to be completed in 3 40-minute classes, the details are lost. So when a large, beautiful painting has to be fitted in a frame that I have, I have to squeeze and distort and force it into this frame, and the result is a picture that is nowhere as beautiful as the original, which with much of the details lost. So it's something like, we take a flower, separate each petal, and show it to the students at different times, one at a time, and then expect them to visualize the whole and appreciate the beauty of the flower. We leave them, unprepared to face the world with its interconnected issues that transcend such narrow academic disciplines. So, to understand any part, to solve anything, we also need to understand the relationship of that part to the whole. But our system of education, with all its good intentions, has created this fragmentation. Now, this is where stories come in. We can connect all the separate parts using this powerful tool that is the story, the literature, the arts. It not only shows us the whole flower, it also shows the plant on which it grows, the garden in the background, and the whole world around. Because a story is not merely the product of a writer's imagination, it's not just a means of entertainment. It reflects society's values, aspirations. As the writer, any writer tells any story, he or she describes a place, a period, the political climate, the economic situation, the social attitudes, the scientific developments, the culture of the place and the period. They are woven into the lives of the characters, because you cannot write about the hero of the story without explaining what he does, where he lives, how wealthy he is, where the money came from, how much he knows, how he learned all that, who his family and friends are, what he wants, how happy he is, what he is afraid of, what he hopes for, all of which describe the politics, economics, culture, and social trends of the time and place. Thus, a story that captures the essence of history, geography, politics, economics, psychology, science is a vast educational resource. It provides more insights into all these subjects because it gives that subjective, psychological aspect of truth. So this adds a far greater depth, realism than a textbook on that same subject can give. To illustrate this point, Charles Dickens' David Copperfield gives a personal perspective of England's Industrial Revolution. The lives of the factory workers at the time of the Industrial Revolution has been well researched and documented in hundreds of books on history, sociology, and other subjects. But Dickens' portrayal of David, the struggles of this poor boy, and many more who work like him in factories and struggle with poverty and living in crowded industrial towns, adds a realism, a personal perspective, insights which a historical or a statistical description cannot provide. Stories entertain, and because they entertain, we pay attention. And so we remember them. And along with these stories, we also understand more and remember better what they teach. Alexander Dumas is The Three Musketeers, and all of his books in this series. They explain the politics of power. Apart from being a story of adventure and romance, it's also a historical and social record. Dumas's description of the warlike situation between countries, created simply by petty personal reasons, is a lesson for the 20th 21st century as well. Any story can teach, even Harry Potter, if you come to think about it, and so can any movie. Anything that tells a good story and tells it well, because what appeals to the emotions always goes deeper. We've all heard that Jawaharlal Nehru cried when he heard Lata Mangeshkar sing "E Mere Watan Ke Logo" on Republic Day in 1963. Now we're talking about a man who had seen the horrors of World War One, World War Two, independence struggle, partition. He was the first prime minister of 1/5 of humanity. In fact, on 14th August 1947, just as he and Indira Gandhi sat down to have their dinner before he was to go to the Parliament House on the eve of Indian independence, He received a phone call. Indira Gandhi later narrates this incident. Nehru receives news that Lahore, one of his favorite cities, was witnessing cruel violence and bloodshed. He came back to the dinner table shaken and very deeply troubled. Indira Gandhi wondered how her father would go to address the Indian Constituent Assembly and take over from Lord Mountbatten. In a few hours, he went on to make his famous Tryst with Destiny speech. Indira Gandhi herself wondered how he had fortified himself and risen to the occasion. Now, this man, on hearing a song just after the 1962-63 war, was moved to tears. Such is the power of the arts. We fall back on it during happy times as well as sad. Didn't Rakesh Sharma say when Indira Gandhi asked him how India looks from space, Sare Jahan se acha. Every freedom struggle, revolution, or mass movement has its own songs, poems, literature, which were shaped by the events and which also had an impact on history. One good idea from a book can inspire individuals to acts of greatness. One story can spur worldwide debate and result in progressive social movement or legislation. Literature reflects history and it can create the future even. Its influence can go on without an end. For example, Gandhiji was influenced by the writings of many, among them the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy and British social thinker John Ruskin. Reading Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You left a lasting impression on Gandhiji. His political ideology of Sarvodaya or equal upliftment for all was from Ruskin's teachings that he learned. These writings, along with so many other events, no doubt, made him Mahatma. Martin Luther King Jr., nearly after half a century, he championed civil rights in the US, was inspired by Gandhiji's writings and life work. King had a speech on the life and thinking of Gandhiji, and he was so inspired by what he heard that as soon as he left the meeting, he went straight to a bookshop and bought half a dozen books on Gandhiji and reading about ahimsa, civil disobedience. He was convinced about what he should do next. Now, following this chain of events, writings, and their influence, Nelson Mandela took inspiration from Martin Luther King Jr. and repeated one of King's most famous phrases, free at last, when he spoke about South Africans. Malala Yousafzai said she was inspired to act by Mandela, among others. So the movement gets carried on, reading, writing, telling stories, carries on this chain of events resulting in inspired and impactful action. Stories can actually start revolutions. They really have. Former US President Abraham Lincoln is said to have met the American authoress Harriet Stowe and asked her, "Oh, so you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Stowe had actually written Uncle Tom's Cabin then, which was about the inhumanity of slavery in the US. It left such a deep impact on Americans of all races and was a trigger for the Civil War that went on to abolish slavery and unified the country when it actually created the United States of America. Lincoln, who waged and won the war, gave credit to the story and the storyteller. Knowing this story behind the story, that is, knowing about this meeting of Lincoln and Stowe, tells us that any individual's humble step can bring about revolutionary change, and that one humble step can be a good story, even. Anna Sewell's novel Black Beauty, that describes the hardship faced by workhorses in England, resulted in legislation protecting the animals in that country. It changed the mindset of people regarding traditional practices that caused suffering to animals. It made everyone more sensitive. It also went on to change the law of the land regarding what you can do, what you cannot do with animals. So, another aspect of stories is that They make it easier for us to see something from several points of view at once. Now, that's a very valuable perspective because, and most of our conflicts, personal to global, due to the fact that we are unable to see anything from anyone else's point of view except our own. The story of David Copperfield, going back to it again, it can be used to show students the human side of the Industrial Revolution in today's accelerating and often mindless scientific, technological, and industrial development. This can remind us of the need to think about long term sustainability. A Tale of Two Cities, it gives us two opposite perspectives of the French Revolution from two opposite sides, where each side thinks the other is the enemy who's doing wrong, with increasing, intolerance all around us. Giving our youth a broader perspective can make them better people, and it can make the world a better place. Storytelling serves not just the humanities but all branches of knowledge. Literature can integrate diverse points of view. It can also integrate physical objective facts with the subjective human side to arrive at a whole truth. It can, show us the full picture in the humanities as well as in the sciences. And a study of the human side of any scientific discovery can convey valuable knowledge. For example, Copernicus's heliocentric theory that the sun is in the center of the solar system sounds simple enough to us today, but the social psychological process that he went through in daring to think of such an idea and declaring it in the face of the traditionally accepted view of the time, this is as relevant today as it was during Copernicus's time, when all those in power say, oh, the sun goes around the earth. To stand up and say no, it requires courage to be that lone voice of reason, boldly, without worrying about its consequences, is a lesson that we all can teach today to our students, even when we teach them the science, the geography, the history. In the recent past, in fact, we all saw that there is a lot more to vaccines than science. In fact, the developers of the Oxford, the AstraZeneca, or the Covishield vaccine, as we called it in India, said that they created the vaccine just over a weekend. That was all it took to actually create that. It was in convincing the government, funders, general public, managing the logistics of supplying it worldwide, the global politics that entered, the political diplomacy involved, handling the emotions, the fear, the doubt, the criticism, the vaccine hesitancy, and the mental courage, strength, and leadership skills required in managing all of this at a time of acute pressure worldwide. All of this was more difficult and more important. So do you sell it, or do you give it away for free? Do you keep the formula a secret, or do you make it a public good? Do, um, do you succumb to pressure from a wealthy nation, or do you prioritize the needs of a developing country? Do you serve your neighbors first, or do you try to get the maximum mileage out of our country's scientific manufacturing strengths? All of these questions fall outside the academic field of biochemistry, but they determine how the vaccine serves humanity, because ultimately, it is the human being, rather humanity, that must be placed at the center of everything. The world has actually come perilously close to nuclear war a few times in the past. Not it was not made public knowledge at the time, but gradually news does come out that each time there was some mistaken signal, some weather balloon misidentified as a missile threat that resulted in confusion, like between the superpowers, US and the USSR. And all of these were resolved only because of human intervention and common sense. Once one such report was made to the then Russian President Boris Yeltsin. He was informed that the US has launched a missile attack and that Russia should retaliate immediately. But Yeltsin said, I know Bill Clinton, he will not do such a thing. And it turned out to be a technical error that resulted in this wrong alert. One may have all the science, the technical know how, the nuclear armory, the instant communication, but ultimately it's the human being, the empathetic human being, and the interpersonal relations that save the world. And to create empathy and such empathetic leaders, stories can help enormously. I had mentioned that Lagan can teach teamwork and leadership skills. So can Shakespeare, and we'll see how. In one of his plays, King Henry V, Shakespeare describes the Battle of Agincourt in England's Hundred-Year War with France. The English army is in France at the time, and they have had very little food. They've marched a long distance for weeks. The soldiers are all suffering from sickness, and now they are faced with much larger numbers of well equipped, better trained French soldiers. But in spite of the great odds, the English won, losing very few soldiers in that battle. So, what makes this difference? Shakespeare describes the scene very beautifully. Just before going to war, the English king gives a passionate, inspired speech to his men. He tells them that they are a band of brothers. By the time he finishes the speech, every soldier is convinced that he and the king are brothers fighting together for their home, their country. It energizes them like no food, rest, weapon, or training can. And despite all the disadvantages, the army goes on to win. Shakespeare's plays are taught in schools and colleges to widen students' exposure to the English language. The writings can enrich our vocabulary. The depth of truths expressed in the plays can enrich our thoughts and values. But that is only scratching the surface. Now, what more can we teach or learn from this play? Historical facts, because history becomes interesting when we see the personal, emotional side of historical events. Human psychology, because Shakespeare has a thorough understanding of human nature. We can learn about ourselves from reading a story. Leadership skills. King Henry's speech before the battle is taught by renowned military institutes for training. The speech is actually used. A powerful and inspiring leader can multiply the capacity of those he or she leads. And Shakespeare, like many great writers, was a seer of life. And reading his work can give us an understanding of life truths such as it is possible to succeed in the face of great odds. One individual can inspire society and turn the course of history. In life, the materially great or strong or powerful do not always win. Human subjective factors are more powerful determinants of outcomes than objective facts in warfare, in business, sport, politics, in life itself. The power of verbal communication, the power of pride, patriotism, teamwork. We can teach all of this as theory, no doubt, but when we illustrate this using a story, the two-dimensional image becomes a live experience. This is true not just of the speech or a scene from King Henry V. Any story in any language can be used to teach much more than the language, because it is possible for a story to reach where other academic disciplines cannot. One can list so many such works of literature and the learning potential in them, just as we've done very briefly with Shakespeare now. I'd like to take a few more and I'll try to finish in 25 minutes. One is the novel Pride and Prejudice. Another is the adventure story Around the World in 80 Days. Next is Oppenheimer, the recent movie, originally a book. And finally, Invictus, which is actually many things all at once. A study of Pride and Prejudice, written by English novelist Jane Austen, shows how much knowledge is hiding in plain sight. This novel, written over 200 years ago, it actually depicts the impact of the French Revolution on English society. when the lower classes in France were rising against the French aristocracy, it shows how England avoided a violent revolution and the guillotine through changes in attitudes and the relationship between the people of different classes. England underwent a peaceful and progressive social transformation, unlike its neighbor. On the surface, Pride and Prejudice is a simple romance set in quiet English countryside. There is the Bennet couple living with their 5 young daughters in a village. Darcy, a wealthy aristocrat, comes to the neighborhood and falls in love with one of the Bennet girls, Elizabeth. Steeped in class consciousness, he finds Elizabeth's family status inferior, but over time he is able to overcome his sense of superiority, and he sees that the intelligence, the goodness, the strength, the nobility in this villager. It was a time when marriage was about the only option for a girl. Girls were taught to sing and dance and play musical instruments. These were considered enough. Elizabeth's sisters and friends, they cannot wait to be married. Whom they marry is secondary. It is when they marry that is more important to them. Elizabeth alone is different. She sets her priorities and takes her decisions based on her own value system, independent of what society considers important. So Darcy sheds his pride. Elizabeth, who didn't earlier care for his title, wealth, or status, now finds the humbler man ideal for her, and the two get married, like many of our movies. Darcy and Elizabeth, they refuse to be bound by pride, prejudice, old practices, social expectations, and they dare to stand up for what they believe is right. Just some miles away in neighboring France, the aristocrats are too conscious of their superiority. They consider their high birth as a license to assert themselves. They jealously guarded their rank, and they prevented anyone from below, as they considered it, from entering their castles and palaces. They were not aware of or concerned with the discontent around them, the rising aspirations of people. Lost in their own self glory, these aristocrats finally lost everything. Darcy, on the other hand, who represents the aristocracy of England, he behaves differently by agreeing to relate to others outside of his own class. He gives up his ego and saves his head. Figuratively, this individual act of Darcy accepting Elizabeth saves the collective head of the aristocracy of England from the guillotine. And Pride and Prejudice is full of such acts by people who bridge the gaps in society in different ways, and thereby they save it from violent revolution and usher in a peaceful social evolution. Noblemen become friends with working class people, landowners treat their employees' children as their own, they educate them. People are allowed to succeed and come up by dint of education, talent, hard work. If we can show our students that these individual events in the story reveal a common pattern in society, that these are not separate decisions made by by this person or that, but part of the process by which a country evolved from a traditional, rigid, class conscious society to a modern, progressive, democratic nation, we reveal what is otherwise invisible on the surface. Place the two countries, England and France, of 200 years ago. See who did what the consequences were, and you do not even have to conclude with any, and the moral of the story is, it is evident. This simple story and its analysis shows us that one strong individual can make a difference. It shows how societies acting out of their highest values can avoid violence and make great progress. You can read it at one level, you can teach it at one level as a simple love story, a story of a few families and marriages. But at deeper levels, it depicts human psychology and social evolution. Analyzed thus, every story is a priceless treasure. It contains the distilled wisdom of generations. The relevance of Pride and Prejudice, and the study of literature, of the arts, of all stories are not restricted to helping us understand the past. That is only the beginning. They let us understand the present. They enable us to determine our future. This is where the importance is. The French aristocracy would not give way to the rising aspirations of others and paid for this with their heads. Their neighbors accommodated the legitimate aspirations of everybody and saved themselves. So, as a society, as a nation, where do we wish to go? A story can raise this question and direct us to the answers. If we can show our students this process, how well we equip them to take on complex challenges that they are going to face in the future. Now, we move on to the adventure story, Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. It describes the adventure of a man, Fogg, Phileas Fogg, as he travels around the world. As he travels from England to France, Italy, Egypt, India, China, Japan, US, around the world, geography can be taught in a fun way. In each place, Fogg encounters different religions, cultures, customs. A British detective is following him with a legal document which is said to be valid in Egypt and India, but not in Japan or the US. Now, this is in the 19th century. This can open up the topic of colonies, colonization, international law, diplomacy. And throughout the story, we see the high values of high positive human values of Fogg that help him succeed at every turn. We see in action his punctuality, integrity, generosity, perfection, and how every one of these values, his selflessness, come to his rescue and enable him to ultimately accomplish. So, rather than a theoretical moral science class, we see them applied in life. We can show our students the same in a real life setting. When we teach a single subject, say geography, and give the name of the country, its capital, describe its climate, it is an isolated piece of knowledge. When we teach all the subjects and link them to one another, like teaching geography, history, politics, and personality development through a story, the student receives integral knowledge in teaching any subject. If the teacher lets the student see that knowledge, that piece of information in the context of a story, the content gets a live setting. Then we will hear a lot less of these statements from our students. Why should I learn this? Of what use is this? What will anybody do with this? And so on. Storytelling, it can serve humanities education. It can serve the sciences as well. The dichotomy that we make between these two branches of knowledge, science and arts, is artificial. We say, oh, science is objective, it can be measured, and the arts is different. But no, we need the objective facts of science and the subjective dimension of the arts to teach us what life really is. And this is illustrated by the book American Prometheus, or Oppenheimer as it is more famously known today. This story makes us look beyond science at the social, moral, and ethical implications of science. It lets us see beyond the scientists at the human beings within. As artificial intelligence becomes all powerful and pervasive, we are told that 90% of the internet is going to be machine generated in a few years. So that leaves out only those messages that we send our family and friends. And even in that, when we type a mail, we have these tools that suggest use this word, use that phrase, and so on. So as we look at what science and technology can do, stories like Oppenheimer can show the moral dilemma of the vulnerable human being within the successful scientist. It makes us think holistically and question the social responsibility of science and scientists. In fact, the title of the book, American Prometheus, itself tells a story. Prometheus was the Greek god of fire, and according to Greek mythology, He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity for its benefit, but just left the gods very angry, and so they punished him cruelly. The analogy between Prometheus, who gave humans the power of fire, and Oppenheimer, who created atomic power, can make us think. We may not all arrive at the same answer. We may not arrive at an answer at all. But even thinking is an exercise our youth need today. Mindless scrolling and not being able to discriminate between the real and fake and deep fake is a growing concern for everybody today. So, open ended questions like the story of Oppenheimer are what we actually very essentially need today. My concluding example, Invictus, weaves back and forth across history and different ways of storytelling. In 1875, a poem immortalizing human strength and fortitude was written, titled Invictus. Invictus is a Latin for invincible, and it was written by the British poet William Henley. Henley went through some very difficult times in life and wrote these verses at a point when he was just recovering from serious health problems. I'll take a minute to read the poem because it has a bearing on the rest of the story. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. This poem was quoted by Winston Churchill in Parliament at the height of World War II. It was read by US prisoners of war in Vietnam. It inspired Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi. It was recited by Nelson Mandela to his fellow prisoners at Robben Island. Invictus is also the name of a 2009 sports film based on a book. It describes the events that take place in a new South Africa that has just become free of apartheid. The country is to host the 1995 Rugby World Cup. The national rugby team, Springboks, are not expected to perform well because the team has just recently returned to international competition following the lifting of the international sports ban that had been there on Africa during South Africa apartheid times. Actually, after the ban was lifted, India was the first country to visit South Africa to play cricket. In this real life story, Nelson Mandela is the country's president, and Francois Pienaar, the captain of the Springboks rugby team. The country faces enormous challenges, one of the biggest being racial division. Interracial relations in government, police, and civil society are marked by distrust, even ill will actually. Sports too is a casualty. Springboks represents the white supremacy of the apartheid times to many colored people. They favored football. So during rugby matches earlier, they would support other countries, not their own team. Mandela knows that if he cannot unite the country emotionally, it will collapse into chaos. Apartheid may have become illegal, but we know nothing is eradicated as long as it is in people's minds. So Mandela meets the captain of the team, Francois, and implies that a Springboks victory in the World Cup will unite and inspire the country. Mandela also shares with Francois the poem Invictus that had inspired him during his time in prison, which is why the title of the movie. The end of apartheid has created a new South Africa. The next task is to create new South Africans. So this book and the movie, they portray the changes in society as the players interact with the fans and begin a friendship with them. Support for the Springboks gradually begins to grow across the races. Very soon, the entire country comes together to support the Springboks and Mandela's efforts. They know he wants this. The national team defeats one country after another, and then supported by a large home crowd of all races, which includes Mandela in a Springbok uniform, the national team wins the World Cup. This success, improbable and unexpected, unites the nation and transforms it to some extent. The Springboks become rugby world champions, the 43 million South Africans become less divided, and the story shows audience in the stadium cheering their team and leaves the readers and the viewers the world over cheering a country that unites after decades of division. This work of art, it captures the power of sport, of unity, of hope, and in doing so, the story immortalizes the triumph of human spirit. Mandela unified South Africa through rugby. And this story, it cemented the gains and it shared it with the rest of the world, even in regions that did not have a multiracial society or play rugby. This, I believe, is the power of storytelling. There is a saying that one cannot step into the same river twice. That's because the river can never be the same at any 2 points in time. It looks, sounds, feels different every time. Moreover, we are never the same at any 2 points in time. With each passing day, we learn and grow. The same can be said for a story. One can never tell the same story twice. Our understanding grows deeper every time we read more and more into the story. We gain more. And how much literature has to offer. Literature, all the arts, they appeal to our senses. But when we just see its aesthetic value, we are looking only at the surface. Beneath this treasure trove waiting to be discovered that reveals to us the distilled wisdom of humanity. If storytelling is such a fine thing, then why are we all not telling stories? We believe we have constraints, the syllabus, the annual schedule, the timetable, parents' expectations, government regulations, collectively called the system. But as the British educationalist Sir Ken Robinson says, if you are the principal or part of the school or college board, then as far as the teachers, lecturers are concerned, you are the system. If you're a teacher or a lecturer, then to your students, you are the system. So there is always a little room, and in that space, we can include stories at the institutional level, include something of the arts in all courses. Let medical students study history, let chemists study leadership skills from drama, let engineers learn ethics, because we all need everything. At the personal level, include stories in all that you teach. We know the story of that old story of the cap seller and the monkeys. There was a cap seller who fell asleep under a tree, and he woke up to find all his caps on the heads of the monkeys on the trees. He threw the cap down, the monkeys followed, and he retrieved his caps. It so happened that this cap seller grew old, generations passed, and the man's grandson was continuing the family business. He too traveled from village to village selling caps. He too wanted to take rest one day and fell asleep under the tree. And then the same thing happened. When he woke up, he saw the monkeys on the trees around wearing his caps. He knew exactly what to do. So he took off his cap, threw it on the ground, and waited expectantly. Nothing happened. Wondering what was wrong, he looked up, and one of the monkeys said, "You think only your grandfather told you stories? Even our grandfathers have told us stories." So, this is the power, entertaining literature. It enthralls us with humor, suspense, and the action of an engaging plot. Superior literature, It presents the author's insights into human character and action and their interrelationships and consequences. Still finer literature, it reveals the interactions between action, individual character, and the evolving character of society. And the greatest literature goes still further. It reveals not only insights of the individual and social character, but of the character of life itself. I invite all of you to make use of this infinite resource that is available in our stories for a more effective education and ultimately for greater human welfare. Thank you.
Ma'am, we have our first question here. How does storytelling enhance critical thinking skills in the study of humanities?
Okay. I was just trying to follow the chat. This is in chat or this is outside of it? I am not sure. Okay. How does storytelling improve the critical thinking? Basically, what the story does is it actually reaches where other academic subjects streams they just cannot. They have the stories, the emotional impact of the stories. They have that power, and when it comes to our own lives, we look at it from our point of view. I say this and look at the way the other person reacts, whereas when you look at a story, you're able to see both sides exactly the same, and that actually that uh, perspective that it gives you, that all rounded perspective that it gives you, lets you think, because here you are without any prejudice, you don't have any preference. The two characters A and B are equal to you. Sometimes we do like a character, sometimes we don't, yes, but still we are able to look objectively. Whereas when it comes to our own life, or when you hear something about somebody we know, that objectivity actually goes. We have a preference, we have a choice, we want to believe in something. When it comes to a story, we are able to read it with an open mind, and so during that to an extent actually helps us in thinking critically. And when you see what are the different impacts, the author can actually go into that person's mind and analyze it from everywhere and show it. So we get some perspectives which we otherwise cannot get when we read our newspapers, when we look at our own experiences. That is the power of a story. It gives you the complete picture, almost like an aerial view of the whole thing, and that helps, I believe.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. We have another question here. What types of stories are most effective in conveying moral and ethical lessons within the context of humanities education?
I believe any story, age appropriate, but any story can do it. There are people who actually teach from the traditional Panchatantra stories. The Aesop's fables were actually written only for that purpose. But you can do the same thing. There are some very creative teachers who actually even take movies and TV serials. It's not very easy to do it from some serials, but some movies, some serials, some classics, from anywhere it is possible to take the moral and to teach it. For example, if you take around the world in 80 days, there is this man Phileas Fogg who actually goes around the world to win this bet. There is one point in the US where the Red Indians capture his servant who travels with him and goes away. He doesn't know where the man is, where the Red Indians are, what has happened, whether the servant is alive or not, whether he will be able to save him. Nothing is known. He has some people around him, and all those people, the Americans say, sorry, we can't do anything. We don't know where he is. There's nothing we can do about it. And this man, Fogg, without knowing anything, without even having any weapons, he says, I am going to save my servant no matter what. It can cost me my life, it can cost me my bet, nothing matters. I'm going to save this man. So he acts out of this ideal, and circumstances almost conspire to help him. We see this in every stage. So any story can be taken and used to teach the children any moral, any ethic, any social value. Even this movie Oppenheimer, it can be very disturbing. So according to the age, we would need to use it. But I believe there is nothing that cannot teach us either positively or negatively. The positive, the happier ones are better for younger children. That's the only criteria.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. There's another question here. Which media is apt for storytelling?
For the younger ones, I believe that personal interaction would be best when they see the teacher, the expression in person, with as much of effects that you can have, song and dance. That would be ideal at the younger ages for sure. As they grow older, you can have this what we call flipped learning today. Here is this book, go and read it and come to class, and then we will discuss it. This way we actually save time also, and the valuable time that we spend in person or online together can be used for an interaction. And it also gives them time to think about it, reflect on what because each time after half an hour when you think about it, you look at it differently, you understand it deeper. And so whether you use the book or you use some digital uh, PDF, or even ask them to watch a movie. The method, if it could be done through this flipped learning model, which where you ask them to read it and then in class or in a group you discuss it, that would be great. But for the smaller children, just the simple old-fashioned way of face-to-face interaction with all the efforts. Now storytelling is actually a very popular profession which is much in demand. So that for the smallest, the youngest children, that in-person telling a story would be the best, I feel. And it differs with age.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. There's another question here. How can educators incorporate diverse voices and stories to create a more inclusive humanities curriculum?
If you take even something like Gone with the Wind, it is about story of these slave owners in the American South. We now believe slavery was wrong, owning people, all of that is wrong. This story is about a family that has inherited, the Scarlett O'Hara has simply grown up with all of these slaves. They don't ill treat them, they treat them as best as they can. And then finally, you see these changes. You see what is happening in society, in the world, in the country there, and how their practice is considered wrong. In that situation, you're able to see the side slavery from this family's point of view, from the slaves' point of view, from the northerners, the other people who want to abolish slavery, from that point of view. So, any story, when you teach it in such a way that you don't start off with this person is good, that person is bad, but I think when we just present every side, this we can do with any story. When we present all the sides together, there are some questions for which there are no answers at all. Was Oppenheimer right or wrong? Was some historical characters in our mythologies, some of their actions when they tell a lie to save a life? All of these questions, I think we can bring them up, we can raise these as a question, and we can discuss this in class. And even in a class, there are diverse views in a story. In the class also, if we are able to manage without uh, the whole thing resulting in a fight, if we are able to moderate the discussion where everybody is able to voice their views, that itself I think is a very good education, a very good training. We cannot possibly arrive at all the answers, and there is no one right answer. But if we are able to hear the other person, if we are able to say arrange a discussion in a class in such a way that one person is able to hear an opposite view without actual any animosity, hostility, and argument, if we can bring that culture in our classroom, that will be a very very great training that we desperately need in adults today.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that. There's one last question. Are there ethical considerations when using storytelling as an educational tool in the humanities?
Well, when there is that Enid Blyton series, and it is being rewritten today. That's because there are certain words that were all right then, which are unacceptable today. And even in our writings, we used to write he, his, him, generally while speaking about any one person in general. Now you do not say that, you say he or she, him or her, things like that. So all of these change with time. And so what would be appropriate today would be the best for children. If at all you pick a story from some place where the word that was used then is just not polite today to be used, we can tell the children that. In fact, during the time of Jane Austen, there was one very famous book called A Father's Legacy to His Daughters, in which there is this man who has four daughters, Gregory, and he advises his daughters. But this book was published, and so this was meant as an advice for all girls at that time. He says, if at all you have learned anything, try to hide it as much as you can, because otherwise nobody will want to marry you. This was a sincere advice a man was actually giving his daughters at that time. He meant it well. Now, if we were to read that, it would sound rather atrocious. But if we, even in reading that, if we can tell the students, this is how it was then, 200 years back, this was the condition. But today, this word was accepted then, it is not accepted today. This practice was all right then, but today we have changed, we have evolved, things have changed. Even slavery for that matter. I was once actually teaching some small children something about history, and I told them, oh, slavery existed. And they said, oh, then all those slave owners must have been very bad people. It's not that simple. And if we can tell them that, they grew up in this and then they changed, they transformed, society evolved. If we can show that transition, then I believe that as such there would really be no ethical concerns. Whatever it is, we could explain to the children. So there is nothing out of bounds. No.